The human need for artistic expression has been around as long as there have been humans. For more than 30,000 years, we have been embellishing our clothing and fabrics with threads and decorative stitching, and we still do so today. While much of modern embroidery is accomplished by machinery, there are still many of us who enjoy the slow process of pulling thread through fabric by hand to create fanciful images. For me, I approach embroidery as a painterly process, layering fabrics and threads as you would layer paint to create compositions. But I didn't start this way. La 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 la. It was because of social media, with its images of beautiful hoops full of flowers and inspirational sayings, that I became interested in embroidery. I really wanted to create my own work that was similar to those gorgeous hoops. And I learned how to make the flowers and leaves and the lettering. And I made many hoops as gifts for friends. From there, I became interested in seeing what I could do with embroidery and seeing if I could make it a more painterly process. I began playing with a mix of applique and thread to recreate different images that I found online. So the first few hoops in this style were other artists' line drawings that I recreated with fabric and thread. And I played with how much fabric to leave exposed, what does it look like if it's all stitching, what do the under fabrics do for me. Not all of my initial embroideries were successful. This ape embroidery, I stitched it and pulled it out probably 6 times, and in the end, I still don't like it. It's really creepy. After finding some success, I began to use my own imagination and my own images as the basis for my embroideries. It brought me so much joy to conjure up in my imagination these different images and then bring them into existence. Some of my embroideries relied on using applique and letting a lot of the fabric show through to create parts of the image, and some were mostly thread. I find that I like a mix of these two techniques. I think relying on the fabric means your stitches don't have to be packed quite so tightly together to have the image read the way you want. And I think having quite a bit of fabric exposed also adds to the interest and the texture of the image. To create my embroideries, I start with the idea. Now you can freehand any image you can conjure from your imagination. With my embroidery, I aim for a little bit of realism, so I usually start with a photograph, and I use an editing software to piece it all together and to size it for the hoop. My daughter suggested using our dog Mabel as the model for this particular embroidery. Since she's a herding dog, we thought it would be cute to make her a cowgirl. For background fabric, I typically use quilting cottons. When I first got started, I was using linens, but I like the variety of prints and colors available in quilting cotton. I like to layer the fabrics on top of each other to start the image for a couple of reasons. First, I don't have to pack the thread in so tightly to get coverage. And second, when I cut I call it an under fabric out to put on the background fabric, it serves as a guide for proportion and shape for my image. You can transfer your image to your fabric any number of ways. You can freehand it. You can use graphite paper and trace over it. You can use an iron pen on the back of the image with a light box and then iron it over to your fabric. I find it easiest to just cut out the main color blocks of the image. Once I have those pattern pieces, I cut them out of a fusible web. You can also use a fabric glue for this step. Just a word of caution on the fabric glue is if you're heavy-handed, it does dry a bit like Elmer's glue, so it can look like staining on your fabric, and it can also create like a hard crust that makes it difficult to stitch through. I usually pick a light, medium, and dark color for each main section of my image. Since Mabel's fur has so many colors, I'm going to select multiple colors of gray. Some embroidery artists are very careful about keeping the back of their embroideries very tidy. Since my embroideries hang on the wall and you do not see the back, I don't worry about keeping it tidy. I use traditional sewing knots back there. Embroidery floss has 6 strands. I separate it and I use 2 strands at a time. The more threads you use, the chunkier your image looks, and the fewer threads you use, the more refined the image ends up looking. I use 2 threads because I do not have the patience to create these images with only 1 thread. The fewer threads you use, the longer it takes. My approach to embroideries is a painterly approach. When I paint pictures, typically I do an underpainting, which is like the background fabric. Then I will color block in my main sections, which is like my under fabrics. And then I come in with the details, which is like the thread that I'm using. I don't worry about performing any particular embroidery stitches. I just lay down thread where it makes sense. One thing to keep in mind is that each stitch is like a paintbrush stroke, and so the direction of your thread does have meaning. So in this embroidery of Mabel, every thread I put down really indicates fur. So I want to lay down the stitches in the direction the fur is going. And Mabel's fur is kind of crazy, which makes it fun to stitch this one because her fur goes in every direction. It's very simple to finish the hoop. Well, that's all I have for you today. As always, thank you so much for joining me. And until next time, bye.
La 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 la. Bum bum bum. Digga da 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 da.